Hey folks, today I want to talk about a couple of new features in PowerCards called templates and replacements. And these essentially allow you to extract information from your PowerCards that might be common to several different cards and put them in a library that you can use across your cards, which allows you to update them all in one place, fix bugs, make changes, things like that, extend their functionality. And I kind of hope that down the line the community will come up with a library of common templates for various game systems to allow people to make functional, attractive power cards even more easily than they can now. So let's start off looking at just a regular old basic attack macro in power cards. And this is nothing super fancy, but it's the kind of thing you might see in a regular 5e game. We're going to have a name of the card that shows the character's name, the weapon type, then we'll have an attack roll. We'll roll a d20, we'll add the strength modifier, proficiency bonus, and we'll compare it to the AC of the target. And then we'll spit out some damage information. We'll tell them we did 1d6 damage plus strength modifier on a hit, or 2d6 plus a strength modifier on a critical. Now there's no calculation of actually did the attack hit based on the armor class. We're just going to display that information no matter what we rolled for the attack roll. So if we test this macro out, we'll just see Kara attacks the skeleton here. She rolls a 19 versus an armor class 12, so she hits, but she only rolls 1 for the damage dice. If it had been a critical, she would have done 9 points of damage. And this is a pretty generic macro. If the skeleton happened to have a quarterstaff, he could use the exact same macro to attack Kara. But the key there is if the skeleton happened to have a quarterstaff. What if the skeleton has a sword or a bow or any other weapon? He's not going to be able to use that macro because it's specific to the quarterstaff. The same is true for Kara. She uses her quarterstaff on a regular basis, but she usually casts Shillelagh before she does. And in order to do that, we'd have to come in here and change the name of the weapon, the modifier it's used, because a Shillelagh uses wisdom instead of the strength modifier. We'd have to change the damage because it changes the damage to a 1d8 or a 2d8. And of course we've got a macro for that. It looks almost identical to the quarterstaff macro, but we've gone in and made those changes that I was just talking about, the wisdom modifier and the damage dice. So when Kara uses this attack against the skeleton, well, her attack roll, she added 4 for her wisdom bonus, but her dice roll was only a 2, so it wasn't that great of an attack. But she does considerably more damage because she's adding her wisdom modifier. So that's great, but we have to create these individual attack macros for every weapon we've got out there. And if you have 5 characters in your party, you've got each one has 3 to 4 weapon attacks they might use on a regular basis. That's a lot of macros you have to maintain. It would be nice if we could extract all the stuff about a weapon attack that's not specific to the weapon and put that in a template so we can use that later. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to copy what we have in this attack macro right now and create a new handout, and we're going to call it PowerCard Templates. And this name is case sensitive, just like the format template. And it will go ahead and paste what we have down into the notes field. Now a template needs a name, and that's the first thing on the line. And we'll call this one weapon attack. We follow that with a colon to tell it everything after the colon is the template itself. And a template is really just a list of tags that we're going to add to the power card when we use the template in a card. So we're going to add the name. We can't use the @ curly bracket notation in a template because a template never goes through the chat server. PowerCards is going to add this template to the card after the chat server has done its work. And that notation is all handled by the chat server, so we can't use that. But what we can use are parameters, and we can have any number of parameters. The first parameter is numbered at 0, And we identify a parameter in our template by using a tilde, the parameter number, and then an exclamation point. So we have tilde 0 exclamation point is the first parameter. We want to allow you to substitute a different weapon name. So we'll make quarterstaff, we'll replace that with tilde 1 exclamation point. So the first parameter is the character's name, the second parameter is the name of the weapon. A template has to be all in a single logical line. It can wrap around, but it can't have a line break. So we're going to hit delete to pull the attack line up here onto the same line as the name tag. Again, we can't use this notation, but we're just putting the character name in here again, and we've already got a value that is replaced by the character name. So we can just go ahead and reuse the 0 parameter. So we roll an attack roll. We're not going to use the strength mod, but we'll go ahead and let you pass in a different mod, and we'll make that parameter number 2, which is the third parameter on the line. What kind of modification it is, and this shows up if you've ever hovered over a PowerCards attack. It lists out the 1d20, the modifier for strength, and then the label that we put after it to identify what that modifier is for. So we'll call that parameter 3. The proficiency bonus of the character that's making the attack we'll call parameter 4. The target armor class, we'll call that parameter 5. And now we've hit the end of the attack line. And just like we did for the attack line, we're going to pull the damage line up by hitting the delete key. So on a hit, we're going to replace the character name again with tilde 0 exclamation point. We're going to replace the damage dice with the 6th parameter, because AC was the 5th parameter. 6th parameter is going to be the damage. We need to put the ability modifier for the attack in again, which was parameter number 2. The label for that modifier was 3. And what kind of damage it is going to be our next parameter, but I'm actually going to skip 7 for now, because when I use the template, I'd like to put the base damage and the critical hit damage next to each other, and I'll put the damage type at the end. So we'll make this parameter 8 instead of 7. And then we can come down and replace the critical damage dice with 7 that we skipped over before. And finally, once again, we're going to replace the ability modifier with parameter 2, and then the label for that with parameter 3. So this looks very similar to what we had before, except anywhere where we filled in specifics, we are now using parameter identifiers. So let's save this and see how we would use it. Let's go ahead and create another macro to use this template. And we'll just call this 04 quarterstaff template. So power, and to use a template we use the new template tag followed by the normal separator between a tag and the content, the name of the template, which was weapon attack, and then we need to use another vertical bar, and then we need to start listing parameters. Now our first parameter, which was tilde 0, is the character's name. So we'll go here, we can use the selected notation. So we'll go ahead and do selected character name. The tilde 1 was the weapon name, and in this case we're going to call it, say, quarterstaff. Tilde 2 is the ability modifier, which was strength mod. The label for that is STR. Parameter 4 was the proficiency mod for this character. Oops, sorry. Proficiency bonus. Parameter 5 was the target's armor class. Parameter 6 was the damage on a normal hit. Parameter 7 is the damage on a critical hit. And parameter 8 is the type of damage. Alright, So we have a new macro, one line that, as long as we've done everything correctly, will do exactly the same thing that our original macro did. So let's go ahead and try this out. And of course, I forgot to put the exclamation point in front of power. Sorry about that. We'll try that again. So there we go. It does exactly the same thing. And again, either one of these characters can use it. And that shortens up what we would have to change when we swap this over. Let's go ahead and save copy it first. Save it. And create a new macro for Shillelagh. And show just what we have to change in order to use that. So we'll call this number 5. We'll go in and change the quarterstaff to Shillelagh. Change this to Wisdom. Change this to Wiz. And then finally change the damage dice, 1d8 or 2d8. Now, we did have to make quite a few changes here. Oh, and I left out a vertical bar. We had to make quite a few changes here, but a lot fewer than we had to make in the original macro, because we're not repeating selected Wisdom mod 3 times during the card, because it's in the template. So again, go ahead and test this out, and we should have a Shillelagh attack now that is considerably better for Kara than her quarterstaff attack. So that's great, but we could probably extrapolate this even further. What if we want to add that damage calculation only if we actually hit the target? That's a pretty common thing to do. And in fact, I've already got a macro in here that includes those conditional operations. And again, this is a pretty standard PowerCards construct. Everything else at the top is the same, but instead of the damage line, we've now changed it over to a hidden roll that deals or rolls the damage and stores it in either the DMG roll ID or the crit roll ID. And then we have some conditionals based on that. If the attack wasn't a 1 and the base die roll wasn't a 20 and it's greater than the armor class, then we hit and we display that damage amount. If the attack was a 20, then we did a critical hit and we scored a critical hit, we write the damage out. If the attack is less than the target's armor class but isn't a 1 on the die, then we missed. And then finally, if the attack is a 1 on the die roll, then we fumbled the attack and we display that information here. So just like the previous macro, we can test it out. And we see this time she rolls a 12 versus an armor class 12, and she hits for 1 point of bludgeoning damage. So we'll try that again, attack again, and this time we missed, and it just tells us we missed. So we don't have that extra damage information in there, which is not pertinent. Same thing would be true of a critical hit. We would only see that critical line if she rolled a 20 on the attack die. And again, just like the previous macro, either character can use it. Any character on our game would be able to use that. So we've got a few dozen attack macros spread across all of our characters, and if we were still doing it this way without templates, now we've got to go in and modify every one of those attack macros to include this information and change the damage roll to this H roll. That is a mess. So instead of doing that, let's go ahead and update our template. We'll copy this information out, go back to our template, and this time, instead of damage at the end here, we're going to clear that out and we're going to paste in what we just copied over. So the H roll, if we remember, the damage was parameter 6 per non-critical. The ability modifier was 2. The ability label was 3. The critical damage was 7. The ability modifier was 2. And the ability label was 3. So we repaired that day. We replaced the damage line with an H roll. We prepared the parameters that we had to pass to it. And now again, I'm going to leave these all as separate lines while we edit them, and then I'll make them part of this baseline when we're done with that. So if we remember, the armor class of the target was parameter 5. We need to change the character name was parameter 0. Hits for that amount of damage, and the type of damage it was parameter 8. So that fixes up the the line that runs when we hit the target. What if we perform a critical hit? Alright, well, pretty much the same thing. We need to replace the character name with parameter 0. Scores a critical hit for crit damage, and we replace the damage type again with parameter 8. If we were less than the AC, this is we're going to miss this attack. Parameter 5 was the armor class of the target. Excuse me. Again, parameter 0 was the character name. And then finally, on a fumble, the only thing we really have to replace here is the character name again. So that parameter 0 gets used a lot in this macro, just because we're showing the name of the character in every one of these lines practically. So now we need to compress this all into a single virtual line. So I'm going to hit delete at the end of each of these to bring the lower line back up to them. And there we go. We'll save the changes to this. And now we go back to the macro we wrote that uses our template. And let's just clear out our chat window here real quick, just to keep things clean. Now we go to use this, test this macro, attack the skeleton again, and we only see the misses line. Let's try that again. Oh, she missed again. Let's go another one. She critical hit. We see the critical hit line. We don't see the regular hit. We don't see the misses. We don't see the fumble. So now, without changing this macro at all, we've gone and added all that functionality to the card. And in fact, if we had modified this for Shillelagh, that Shillelagh macro wouldn't change at all. What if we did modify this for the Shillelagh? This isn't the quarterstaff. That functionality doesn't change at all. We are relying entirely upon the template, and any changes we make to the template will be reflected in all the cards that use it. Now I do want to point out a couple of things about templates. You can use as many template lines as you want in the PowerCard macro. So you could have a header template that displays some information. You could have the weapon attack template and then a footer template. They will be added and preserved in position. So if you have some regular tags before the template and some regular tags after, whatever is in the template will be inserted in the middle there. Now, of course, it is important to remember that tag names have to be unique. So I'm assuming that when I use this weapon attack template, I'm not going to have another tag with the name tag, the H-roll tag, the attack tag. Otherwise, I'll have run into issues. So you might, a couple of different solutions there. Make sure you're only using templates that define unique tags that aren't going to be used in other templates you use or in your power card. Or you can use the same name tag in the templates themselves, but you're going to run into a problem where you really won't know what other tags have used that name already. So it's best to make sure you're using templates that are specific to one particular function and don't duplicate the names of the tags they use. The other important thing to note is that the roles, let me bring this up here, the role IDs, or the inline roles, I should say, in the power cards are usually processed by the chat server. And so this would normally be done by the chat server before PowerCards gets the role. And the result of that role will already be calculated and stored with the role text inside what gets past the PowerCards. So that's a problem because at runtime, when the chat server would be able to get a hold of this, it doesn't know anything about the tilde 6 exclamation point and the tilde 2. So we can't process those at chat time. And if we don't process them at chat time, we have to include a role ID assignment, or we'll run into errors. I can show that real quick. Let me take out the damage role ID. So if you run into this, if you see this kind of message, you'll know why you're getting it. So now we've removed that damage identifier. We'll run this macro and attack the skeleton again, and we'll see this syntax error. It expected some slashes and it found a 1. And that's because when it goes to reprocess a role that was not available at the chat server, it just has to have a role ID assigned to it. But we put that back in, save the changes, and everything should work normally. And the role IDs, you can assign any names you want if you don't actually need to keep them, but because you're probably going to use them later on, you'll probably want to assign role IDs to them anyway. Let's move on and take a look at replacements now. And replacements are, you can kind of think of them as the opposite of templates. So instead of bringing in a bunch of tags that you're going to use in the card, replacements let you define key and content pairs that are going to be swapped out in all the tags in your card. So what exactly does that mean? Well, let me clear everything out here so we'll have a clean slate to start with. Close all these windows and clear our chat log. Okay. So let's start with a simple example here. We'll pop open and create a new handout. And we're going to call this one PowerCard Replacements. And again, the name is case sensitive, just like the templates and the formats. And a replacement list is a name followed by a series of tags. Well, not tags, because we use that word for reserved words in PowerCards. So we'll call them keys and the values that will be replacing those keys. So let's make a simple one here. Quarterstaff. And the name ends with a colon, and then we just start listing the key and value name, or pairs. So the first value will be called W name, weapon name. Separate that from the value that we're going to replace it with a vertical bar, and then each pair of keys and values is separated from each other by a semicolon. So weapon name for quarterstaff, the damage type for a quarterstaff is bludgeoning. The base damage for a quarterstaff is 1d6. The crit damage is 2d6. The ability modifier is strength. Okay, we'll save that, and then we'll work up a quick macro here that will just use some of those replacements. All right. So to use a replacement list, we use the tag replacement and a bar and the name of the list. Now, we just start typing tags. So let's use now we're going to use one of our replacement tags for the first time. And much like the parameters in templates, replacement tags get surrounded by special characters. In this case, they start with a tilde and end with a $sign. The template parameters end with an exclamation point. These end with a $sign. So wherever we have the word W name surrounded by a tilde and a $sign, that will be replaced by quarterstaff in every tag in the macro. So we'll finish writing this out real quick. Quarterstaff attack, and we'll just make an info tag just to display some information. So character names, weapon does base damage or on a hit or crit damage on a critical hit. Okay, so really all we're just doing here is going to display a couple lines of text that tell us what the weapon does. So we can test this out, and we see quarterstaff does 1d6 on a hit or 2d6 on a critical hit. But what's important to note here is that the identifiers, the keys, are being replaced by the text in the macro or in the replacements list. So let's go back and edit our replacements list real quick and add another replacement line. This one, and let me make this bigger so you can see it. This one we'll call Shillelagh. Again, W name is now going to be Shillelagh. Damage type is still going to be bludgeoning. The base damage is going to be 1d8. Crit damage is going to be 2d8. And the ability is wisdom. So save this and then go back into our macro here, and instead of quarterstaff, Shillelagh. And now when we run it, we'll get the information about what a... Oh, and apparently I have a typo. Let's go in, and I sure do. Fix that. And run this again. We get the information that the Shillelagh does 1d8 on a hit or 2d8 on a critical. So now the only thing we've changed here is the replacement line that we're going to use out of the replacements handout to fill out the information on the card. So if we think about replacements and templates and what we've done so far, we should be able to combine these two features to create something even more interesting. So again, let me clear out everything, close our chat window, and we will start to look at how we would do that. And we don't actually have to even revisit our template at all. We'll go back into our quarterstaff template, or macro, excuse me, and let's go ahead and add a replacement quarterstaff. And we'll modify the template. Okay, so we're still going to pass it the character's name, but now we're going to send in W name, because that was the key we used for the name of the weapon. This we had a name of ability. The proficiency bonus, the target's AC will stay the same, but here we now have base damage and crit damage. And let me go back and put a $sign after ability. Don't want to forget that. Crit damage and then damage type. Alright, so now we've got this macro updated, and it should use all those values that we just put in the replacements in order to make an attack. And indeed we see it's loading the strength in there. We don't have a strength bonus. One minor thing that I'd like to address at some point in the future is that we still have to know whether it's we have to know the modifier that we're going to use, because that notation, again, like I said, can't be done inside a template or a replacement, because it's done by the chat server. So that would, having the ability to pull the strength modifier out of the character sheet is something that I'm looking at for a future version. We'll see where that leads. But the nice part is, from what we have already, the only thing we really need to change here, if we want to make this a Shillelagh attack, is change the name, and in this case we have to change the strength to wisdom. Excuse me. And then we can attack with a shillelagh. And again, as always, this is generic enough that the NPC can attack as well. And the skeleton is actually an NPC character sheet, but they have all these PB and wisdom mod and everything attributes on the character sheet, so that works. So that covers the basics of using templates and replacements in PowerCards 3.7.7. It really only scratches the surface though, because you can get pretty complicated combining these two tags. I've got a working macro right now based on the same weapon attack template we have here that also lets you take into account the advantage, disadvantage, and normal status in the character sheet. So I don't believe we've ever been able to do that with PowerCards before without writing multiple macros to do the same thing. But utilizing the replacements feature, we can. There is one more thing I want to talk about, and that is if you try and make a roll within a replacement or a template and need to put values inside that replacement. So let me pull up a quick macro to do that. So if you remember, we had a macro that just gave us some information about Kara's quarterstaff attack. And we'll bring that back up and use it as an example here of the caveat that I'm talking about. So let's say instead of just displaying the information, we wanted to go ahead and roll the damage. So we'll put that in here. We're going to have a damage line. It's going to say Kara's weapon does base damage on a hit. So if we run that though, we're going to get an error. And let's go ahead and just show that this is what's causing the problem. We'll change that back to 1d6 and then run it again, and we'll see that it works normally. So what's going on here? Well, the problem is when base damage is listed in here instead of 1d6, this this inline roll, the chat server doesn't know what to do with it, and our macro is processed by the chat server. So the chat server comes along and says, well, I have no idea what that tilde base damage $ means, so it throws an error. So how do we get around that? Well, what I've been doing is for roles that I don't want the chat server to process, I'm going to go ahead and add another replacement template or replacement set. And I'm just going to put it at the top here, and we're going to call it roll bars. And it's going to have two replacement tags in it. RB for roll begin, and that's going to get replaced by two opening square brackets, and RE for roll end, and that's going to get replaced by two closing square brackets. So let's save that, come back into our macro, and now we need another replacement set because we're using another set of replacement variables. Roll bars, and we'll just change our opening brackets to tilde RB $, and our closing brackets to tilde RE $ for roll begin and roll end. So now if we run this, we should no longer get the error, we should just get a regular attack. So what's happening here, like I said, is that the chat server doesn't understand it, so we have to hide it from the chat server, and we're adding those opening and closing curly braces, or not curly braces, square brackets, during the replacements phase. Now the same caveat to rolling in a template applies here as well. If we are not letting the chat server process it, then we have to include a roll ID. So if I take the roll ID out and run the test, it's going to fail with a similar error to what we saw before. So put that back in, and everything should work normally. So that's the real gotcha to keep in mind when you're working on your macros. You see these syntax errors. Make sure you're not making a roll without a roll ID, and make sure that if the chat server can't process the roll, you're using replacements for the opening and closing square brackets. And I'm sure as we get more complicated with developing templates, I'll be back with another video. But for now, take care, and I'll see you next time.